Court said today that they will hear the arguments of TikTok, as TikTok is facing a permanent ban in the United States unless ByteDance, its parent company, sells it off. And so they only have until January 19th to do so. So time is of the essence here. The Supreme Court will listen to their arguments starting January the 10th, prior to the ban taking effect 9 days later. So we want to talk about all of this and more with our friend, legal analyst Danny Karon. He joins us. Danny, good to see you here. You've been following this very closely. I just have to ask, were you surprised that the Supreme Court decided to take this case up so quickly? If not, is it only because the ban is ever so soon here? Because usually the Supreme Court can take their time in deciding to hear oral arguments on whatever. They're not doing it in this case. This is very fast for even the Supreme Court.
Sure, the Supreme Court takes its own sweet time. Nobody tells them what to do. But here, TikTok petitioned for expedited review. Why? Because that January 19th date is looming. Now, the question becomes not so much a timing, but substantive. Is this a question, a substantive issue that the court will entertain? Well, if you consider Supreme Court Rule 10, it says the court takes matters of federal law if they're urgent questions. And when you consider how big this question is, the stakes involved, the parties involved, the stakeholders who have skin in this game, not just TikTok, but DOJ, but the national security apparatus, but 170 million users, a lot of whom make their living off the TikTok platform, they all came together, and that's why the court decided to take the case on an expedited basis.
Yeah, so we're just looking at some of our file footage here of TikTok, and I wanted to ask as well, how might the justices come down on this? Is this going to be, purely on ideological lines, or can you see some justices, surprising us with however they rule on this?
A lot of issues are partisan issues. They come down along party lines, which is why it's so important to have your justices on the court if you're a Democratic versus a Republican president. The interesting thing about this issue is that the act that's being challenged by TikTok, it was passed in a bipartisan manner. Everybody wants this on the Republican side and the Democratic side. So you can't really get a feel for whether one side or the other is going to side for or against TikTok. It's a bipartisan issue, and it's a really tough one to tell. And that's the reason why.
Yeah, so speaking of some Republicans, we'll get into President-elect Trump, how he feels about this. But Senate Leader McConnell filed an amicus brief today at the court, urging them to not delay the ban set for January 19th. McConnell wrote that TikTok's First Amendment claims are, quote, meritless and unsound here. That's been TikTok's argument all along, Danny, on these First Amendment grounds here. Will that be enough? Will that satisfy the justices, you think, over the national security concerns vis-a-vis China?
Well, TikTok is, of course, framing this as a First Amendment issue. This is a broad act. It's an unlawful bill of attainder, which is where an act specifically targets one company. And it's unfair. It's not right. It violates the First Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and it's that unlawful bill of attainder. Now, for the DOJ's part, it's going to say, never mind that. We've got national security concerns. Those prevail over any First Amendment issue that TikTok might want to express. I mean, the First Amendment is not unlimited. There are limitations to it, such as obscenity, defamation, incitement, fighting words. I can see the DOJ looking to create another exception to First Amendment freedoms, namely in the name of national security. That's how these arguments are going to shape up on both sides of the V.
I see. I have a statement in front of me from a spokesperson at TikTok. They say this: we're pleased with today's Supreme Court order. We believe the court will find the TikTok ban unconstitutional, so the over 170 million Americans on our platform can continue to exercise their free speech rights. The timing of this is so interesting. To me, the Biden DOJ obviously will be arguing for the ban. They have to, execute and enact the laws here that were passed by Congress, and the ban will take effect, barring what the Supreme Court does, one day before Trump takes the oath of office here. Let's talk about President-elect Donald Trump. He wants to keep TikTok, and he has said as much since the election here. TikTok and the folks over there have noted that the company specifically referenced Trump's support in its emergency appeal with SCOTUS, Danny, noting, quote, there is a strong public interest that this court have the opportunity to exercise plenary review. This case raises novel constitutional questions of profound significance for the entire nation, and this court is the only forum for appellate review under the act. They say an interim injunction is also appropriate because it will give the incoming administration time to determine its position, as the president-elect and his advisors have voiced support for saving TikTok. So TikTok is just trying to get the Supreme Court to buy them time here while Donald Trump will take office January the 20th. So I think it's so interesting. I mean, the timing of this is so interesting. It really is of the essence. You have the Biden DOJ arguing it. Trump's going to be in office mere days afterward, and he might keep it here. So maybe come January 20th, we'll be talking about something completely different.
Well, remember, Trump didn't like TikTok. Then the election happens. TikTok encouraged young voters to vote for him. And now he said, let's take a look. So when TikTok drops reference to President-elect Trump, it's because they want to get the votes from Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and the other Republican justices. Does that mean that they're going to get them? I don't know. It was a bipartisan bill passed, just like I said. So maybe that means the justices ought to back off and follow the will of the country as channeled through our elected representatives. Or maybe the court will say, never mind that. The First Amendment says what it says. It gives TikTok the right to project as it's doing and for its users to enjoy the platform as they're using. We're just going to have to wait and find out.
So should we not read too much into the fact the Supreme Court took the case at all? I mean, couldn't they have just, said, no, we're not taking it. The lower court's ruling stands on this. Should we read the tea leaves into that at all or not?
It's really easy to say, oh, they took it to flip it, to flip the D.C. Circuit. But that's not necessarily true. In matters of federal importance, like I mentioned, Rule 10 prescribes, they could have taken the case to affirm what the D.C. Circuit said so that there's no question but that this act is constitutional. Maybe they're creating that national security exception to the First Amendment. You can't know, and that's the game. That's the stakes. That's the grit, the terror, and the fear that goes into arguing and litigating at the Supreme Court level.
All right, Danny Karon, as always, we appreciate your insight into this. We'll just have to see how the 9 justices might rule on this. They don't have much time, so it's something to keep track of. Danny, thanks.
You're very welcome. It's always a pleasure to be here.